These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Two officers sit in a recovery room in 1905 after the Russo-Japanese conflict. This image was made by Alexandra Fyodorovna, Empress of Russia. Battleship Tennessee fires a broadside as amphibious tractors race toward Okinawa in 1945. The ship carried 12 14-inch guns and gave steady support to the landings. A shop worker stands at the counter in Moscow in 1988 during the late Soviet Union. Empty shelves and a mechanical scale reveal the food shortages of that era. Store workers practiced drill and fitness on a New York rooftop in 1917 during a lunch break. The photo appeared in National Geographic Volume 31 as a show of home front readiness. Charles Atlas reads letters from his home training course while flexing in an office in 1960. His mail order lessons used simple bodyweight moves and reached millions by post. An abandoned mine shaft goes deep through rock with old wood supports and rusted cables. Hand-dug tunnels like this were common in early 20th century sites, and the quiet makes the depth feel endless. A small boy in a brown uniform raises his hand at a mass rally in Berlin in 1934. The scene shows how public shows and youth groups were used to shape loyalty from an early age. The airship Norge glides low over Ekeberg in Oslo on 14 April 1926. Weeks later, it made the first verified flight over the North Pole. People climb the Berlin Wall in 1989 as the border opens and the crowd celebrates. A lone girl stands on top, a clear sign that the long divide is ending. The German Super Heavy tank Maus is being moved to the Kubinka test site after World War II. Its turret and hull are from different prototypes, and the painted mark that looks like a hammer and sickle has an odd shape in this view. A Ford Model T, fitted with a dealer high-water kit, moves through a flood in Green Swamp, Florida, in the early 1930s. Tall stilts lift the chassis and keep the engine above the water, turning a family car into a swamp runner. Mount Royal in 1962 looks over downtown as tall steel television masts rise from the park. City rules limit every building to the mountain summit height, so the skyline stays below the peak. Actress Jean Harlow stands with heavyweight Primo Carnera in the ring in 1933. That year, he won the world heavyweight title, and she was the new face of pre-code Hollywood. Soldiers crouch in a trench about 1 mile from Ground Zero during the Simon test at the Nevada test site in 1953. The blast measured about 43 kilotons as the shockwave passed over them seconds later. New Zealand soldiers pose with a captured German Mauser T. Gewehr anti-tank rifle near Grevillers in 1918. It was the first purpose-built anti-tank rifle and fired a 13mm round, able to punch through early armor. Men stand outside Lynch's slave market in St. Louis, Missouri in 1852. This daguerreotype is one of the few known photographs of such markets in the United States. Civil War veteran Samuel Decker sits with the prosthetic arms he designed and built for himself. The metal frames have hinges and clamp tools, a rare early example of personal innovation in prosthetics. An early phonograph recording room uses a large horn to capture voices onto wax cylinders. Sessions were cut live in one take, and every sound in the room became part of the record. Women sit together in a labor camp yard with bowls of food, and your grandmother is among them during World War II. This rare family photo shows quiet strength in a harsh place. American soldiers march on the Champs-Élysées in Paris after the city was freed in 1944. The Arc de Triomphe marked the route as Allied and French resistance crowds cheered the end of 4 years of occupation. Nicholas II stands with Alexei, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Kolya Derivenko on a snow tower at Tsarskoye Selo in 1916. Family diaries say they built the tower that day, a calm moment before the Empire's final yay. United States 17th Airborne paratroopers with Mohawk haircuts crowd around a map on 23 March 1945. They are being briefed for Operation Varsity, The next day, jump across the Rhine near Wessel, the largest single-day airborne drop of the war. Montreal's Biosphere, the former United States Pavilion from Expo 1967, burns during renovations in 1976. The acrylic skin was lost, but the steel geodesic frame survived and still stands as a museum today. Caproni K-60 Transaereo on Lake Maggiore in 1921, a 9-wing flying boat planned for about 100 passengers across the Atlantic. It crashed on its second test and was scrapped, yet it pointed to giant airliners many years ahead. United States Navy destroyer Edsall is thrown upward by shell blasts, seen from the Japanese cruiser Tone in 1942. It sank near Java after attacks by the battleships Hiei and Kirishima, with support from heavy cruisers, and the crew was lost. An elderly Jewish man crawls near Brigidki prison in Lviv during the pogroms of 1941, while soldiers pass and people cover their faces. German propaganda blamed Jews for killings by the Soviet security police at the prisons. Sven-Ola Thorsen jokes with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the set of Conan the Barbarian in 1982, holding the foam prop hammer used for stunts. Thorsen played Thorgrim, and the film helped launch Schwarzenegger as a leading action star. Soviet tanks and soldiers advance at Kursk in 1943, the largest tank battle in history. The failed German attack gave the Soviet side the initiative, and the push west did not stop until Berlin. German soldiers throw snowballs by the rail cars during a winter break, seen in a rare color image. Most photos from that time were black and white, so this Life magazine shot shows an everyday moment in vivid detail. Civilians in Hankou watch an air battle as Japanese bombers attack, and Chinese fighters rise to meet them on 29 April 1938. The raid marked Emperor Hirohito's 37th birthday during the Wuhan campaign. German guards in Krakow forced Jewish men onto a truck for labor as a squad leader kicks a man, late 1939. The Krakow ghetto was created on 3 March 1941, and most Jews were later deported to Belzec, Plaszow, and Auschwitz. Soviet prisoners of war reached through barbed wire for food during World War II. More than 3 million captured soldiers died in German custody, a stark measure of how harsh this system was. Jerome David Salinger writes pages of The Catcher in the Rye while serving in France in 1944 and 1945. He carried 6 chapters ashore during the Normandy landings and kept writing between duties. 17-year-old pitcher Jackie Mitchell shakes hands with Babe Ruth as Lou Gehrig stands by in April 1931. In an exhibition for the Chattanooga Lookouts, she struck out Ruth and then Gehrig on 7 pitches, a headline moment. A Sikh soldier of the British Indian Army fits a protective mask to a mule during the Second World War. Pack animals were given masks for chemical defense to keep supply lines moving. Civil War veteran Billy Lundy, born in 1858, stands in 1955 beside a North American F-86 Sabre jet of the United States Air Force. One man who saw horse cavalry now poses next to a swept wing fighter of the jet age. German and Soviet officers shake hands after their forces met in occupied Poland in September 1939. Weeks earlier, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had split the country, yet by 1941 they were at war with each other. Crowds pack King Street in Sydney during the tram era, with tracks running straight down the road. The city's first cable tramway opened in North Sydney in 1893, using a moving steel cable under the street to pull the cars. Black smoke rises over Darwin after air raids on 19 February 1942 that killed more than 250 people. It was the largest single attack on Australia and showed the war had reached the continent. Peanut farmers near Kingaroy stand by a tall hand-built stack in the 1920s when most work was still done by people and horses. Peanuts were grown in Australia since the 1860s, but became a major crop only in the early 20th century. Parisians cross a busy corner in 1935 as huge posters for the National Lottery and aperitif brands cover the walls. Streamlined cars and clear Art Deco graphics show a city chasing modern style before the storm. Soldiers practiced the step-by-step drill for putting on protective masks during World War I training. Fast drills like this cut exposure to gas and raised survival on the front lines. Soviet women snipers pose with Mosin Nagant rifles during World War II. The Red Army trained thousands of female sharpshooters, and aces like Lyudmila Pavlichenko logged over 300 confirmed hits. Before acting, Morgan Freeman served as a radar technician in the United States Air Force in the late 1950s. He repaired tracking systems and carried that discipline into his long film career. French resistance members pose with a defaced portrait of Adolf Hitler in Paris the day after the German garrison gave up. The city was freed by French fighters and Allied troops, and crowds showed anger and relief in the streets. A London double-deck bus lies in a huge crater from a wartime air raid in 1940. The Blitz carved many holes like this, yet the city kept trams and buses moving the next day. May M. Link works at an anvil, straightening used bolts for reuse in a wartime shop. Her trained eye sorts sizes at a glance, part of the homefront drive to save metal. Australian gunners of the 2nd 14th Battalion fire a 25-pounder short field gun at Balikpapan in 1945. The cut-down barrel made it lighter for jungle war and faster to move in the Borneo campaign. Ensign Robert T. King flies a Grumman Avenger with about 4 feet of its left wing torn away on 18 February 1945 after a mid-air strike during heavy fire. He told his crew to jump, then regained control and reached safety, while the crew were captured and did not return. German soldiers operate an 8-centimeter Granatwerfer 34 mortar beside a disabled Soviet T-3476 near Stalingrad in September 1942. The tank rests in a trench while the crew sights the tube during the long fight for the city. 16-year-old Susan Joyce sits for a police photo in North Shields on 18 August 1903 after a charge of taking coins from a gas meter. Early mugshots used a chalkboard to show the name, place, and the alleged offense. Joseph Jugashvili, later known as Joseph Stalin, is shown as a student at the Tiflis Theological Seminary in 1896. He studied there in the 1890s before leaving the school and entering political circles. Silas Koistra of the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry was born in the Netherlands on 8 February 1841 and served in the American Civil War. He was wounded at Gettysburg on 1 July and died of blood poisoning on 3 July 1863 at age 22. Thick smoke rises over Haifa as Italian aircraft hit the Muslim cemetery and the Istiklal Mosque in September 1940. The raids were part of the Mediterranean Air War that struck British Mandate ports and towns. Crowds gather in Bethlehem for Christmas in 1906, filling the square by the Church of the Nativity. Processions with clergy and banners mark one of the oldest Christian festivals in the city. An anti-treaty Irish Republican Army fighter is captured by the Irish National Army during the Irish Civil War in 1922. The conflict split former comrades after the Anglo-Irish Treaty and ended with a Free State victory in 1923. Children in China hold out bowls for food during the famine in 1960. The crisis followed the Great Leap Forward policies and killed many millions across the country. Florida police officer James Duckett is fingerprinted after his arrest in 1987. He was later convicted for the killing of 11-year-old Teresa McCabe in a case that shook his community. Hungarian soldier Bela Kiss in a military photo around 1914, later known as the Vampire of Sincota. Investigators tied him to at least 24 murders after sealed barrels were found at his home, and he was never caught. Cosmonauts Georgy Beregovoy and Pavel Popovich give Neil Armstrong a ceremonial hunting rifle on 1 June 1970. Cold War rivals traded friendly gifts after the moon landing, a rare moment of spacefaring goodwill. A new SNCF Class 141R steam locomotive is lifted by crane from the Liberty ship Harold O. Wilson in Marseille on 3 November 1945. Built in the United States for post-war rail recovery, it was among the first of more than 1,000 delivered to France. Polar explorers built this giant ice snowman in 1973 and called it the Guardian of the Pole. It marked their camp on drifting sea ice and added a bit of humor to the frozen world. A family stands by wattle and daub houses with thatched roofs in rural Ukraine around the early 1900s. Clay walls, woven fences, and a stove inside kept heat through long winters, a way of life that lasted for generations. Anne Frank smiles at her school desk in Amsterdam in the late 1930s. Her diary, written while in hiding from 1942 to 1944, became one of the most read books about wartime life and a voice for millions of lost childhoods. A crowd stands with police outside the county jail in Roxborough, North Carolina, in the late 1930s after failing to force their way in to kill a black man without trial. The scene shows how racial violence pressed hard against the thin line of law. Then, a color Kodachrome photo shows a rough wood shack used by black farm workers in Belglade, Florida, in February 1941. Such camps housed seasonal labor in the Everglades sugar fields, with scrap lumber walls and tin roofs. A boy presses his face to a bakery window in the United States in 1932 during the Great Depression. That year, bread lines filled many streets as families had little money for food, while loaves sat behind glass. An English factory worker stands on the shore with his 2 children during a rare week off in 1922. Before paid holidays were set by law in 1938, unions and some employers slowly won time off, sending more working families to the seaside. An early 35-horsepower Caterpillar tractor in 1908 drives across a brook on a small bridge it carries with it. Its wide tracks solved soft ground problems and soon shaped farm machines and the first tanks. 2 Australian soldiers rest in a dugout under an iron elephant steel shelter in Flanders in 1917. The curved roof held back mud and flying metal while the guns roared above. French dentist Auguste Valadier treats a soldier in a trench during the World War I after arriving in his Rolls-Royce clinic. He toured the front to give urgent care and pull teeth so troops could return to duty. The United States Navy PN-9 flying boat left California for Hawaii in 1925 and ran out of fuel about 450 miles short. The 5-man crew turned the plane into a sailboat, lived on rainwater and fish, and reached Kauai after 10 days before rescue. Children in Canada marched in 1947 when a candy bar price rose from 5 cents to 8 cents. The strike began in Ladysmith, British Columbia, and spread to many towns before fading under pressure from makers and newspapers. Johann Dobereiner's tinderbox lamp of 1823 used hydrogen on a platinum sponge to make a steady flame. Friction matches came 3 years later when John Walker found a coated stick would light on rough paper. Costumed marchers dressed as rabbits joined the Potlatch Days Parade in Seattle in 1912. The summer festival ran from 1911 to 1914 to promote the city and drew huge crowds downtown. Hungarian men test gas masks during a civil defense drill in 1935. The calm poses and bare room make the safety gear feel oddly surreal. Summer 1972. In Boston, a young volunteer sits at an abortion rights table with a hand-painted sign. Months later, Roe v. Wade would legalize abortion across the United States in 1973. Callie Campbell, 11, picked 75 to 125 pounds of cotton per day in Oklahoma on 16 October 1916. She carried near 50 pounds in her sack and told the photographer she did not like the work. Performers cast as the Munchkins arrive at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios in 1938. More than 100 Little People actors, many from the Singer Midgets troupe, filmed songs and scenes for The Wizard of Oz. Italian alpine gunners pose with a mountain gun on Mount Adamello, around 3,300 meters above sea level, in 1916. The First World War here unfolded on ice and rock, with troops using skis and tunnels to haul guns across glaciers. London, 1940. A man reads on a park bench as a tethered barrage balloon floats behind him and another drifts high above. These gas-filled guards pushed low bombers higher where guns hit harder and aim failed. Chinese crew lays track for the U.S. Transcontinental Railroad in 1868. Most earned about $30–35 a month, while many Irish crews got $35–40 plus housing. An estimated 12,000–20,000 Chinese workers built the Central Pacific Line. Nomadic justice in Urga, now Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, July 25, 1913. A prisoner is shackled to a heavy chain to stop escape across the steppe. Mobile herders used weighted chains and small huts instead of fixed prisons. After World War II, the Chalifou family lived in a makeshift shack as rationing and joblessness lingered. A child stands amid salvaged goods while two women pose at the door, a snapshot of America's hidden camps. Victorian Britain saw the rise of the fancy rat, bred by London rat catchers and shown at pet clubs by the 1890s. This studio portrait turns a once feared street survivor into a calm companion, years before lab rats made the species famous. London, 1897. Actress Margarita Merrington collapses mid-scene at the Garrick Theatre as 2,000 people applaud. Sure, it is part of the play. Only moments later do they learn it was a real onstage tragedy linked to a man in the front row who slips away in the crowd. A World War II U.S. Marine Corps ID card kept in his dress blues and left hanging in the closet for nearly half a century. The faded ink and worn edges outlasted the war, the years, and were only found after his farewell in 1990. A family gathers for Christmas in 1915 during the fourth winter of the Great War. Simple clothes and a modest table hint at rationing, yet the lens catches a rare, quiet joy. Beijing, June 1989. Students and residents surround a disabled armored vehicle near Tiananmen as its turret burns after overnight confrontations. Images like this flashed abroad briefly before broadcasts were cut and foreign reporters faced tight limits. Vijay, January 1959. 8 members of the Dyatlov group smile en route to their Ural trek. Days later, they were found in the snow after a still-debated incident. Most modern reviews favor avalanche and katabatic wind explanations, but the mystery keeps researchers busy. VT-31 crew scramble off a sinking TBF Avenger after a controlled ditch during flight ops near USS Cabot, Independence-class light carrier CVL-28, on 6 September 1943. The Avenger's sturdy design and rapid rescue drills made many water landings survivable for Navy airmen that year. A decorated Red Army veteran argues with an anti-communist demonstrator in Moscow around 1990 as Glasnost opened the streets to rival rallies. Within 2 years, the Soviet flag he clutches would come down, and the USSR would dissolve in December 1991. Nationalist troops sweep a Madrid suburb in March 1937 during the long fight for the capital. That same month, their Guadalajara offensive stalled, despite foreign support, leaving Madrid in Republican hands for nearly 2 more years. In January 1991, freshman Rep. Sir Bernie Sanders spoke to a nearly empty House chamber, urging restraint before the Persian Gulf operation and warning of open-ended costs and casualties. Days later, Congress narrowly authorized force. Left-wing students in Iran celebrate the 1979 revolution, holding a portrait of Ayatollah Khomeini after his return from 14 years in exile. Many student groups backed the uprising, but within a year, the new order sidelined much of the left. San Francisco's Market Street lies in ruins after the 1906 earthquake, seen from the Union Ferry Building tower. Fires burned for 3 days and destroyed about 80% of the city, making it one of the worst urban disasters in United States history. London nursery nurses tend infants and toddlers, a snapshot of early 20th century childcare in a crowded city. Britain's wartime push soon made this mainstream, expanding government-funded day nurseries from a handful pre-war to over 1,500 by 1944. Kodachrome captured America's home front in full color, and this June 1943 shot shows a furnace hand stoking molten metal for non-stop production. His work fed the wartime boom, turning ore into steel used for ships, aircraft, and bridges. At Bradham's Pharmacy in New Bern, North Carolina, pharmacist Caleb Bradham mixed a new soda in 1893 and called it Brad's Drink. It used sugar water, lemon oil, caramel, cola nut, and nutmeg. October 21, 1943. German occupying authorities declared the Minsk ghetto dissolved after a final sweep. About 2,000 remaining Jewish residents lost their lives, ending one of the largest ghettos in occupied Belarus. In 1918, the Waldorf Astoria in New York hired women to read ticker tape and update stock boards for investors. It was one of the first major hotels to place women in these fast technical roles. A British officer inspects a bunker entrance near Salonika in 1944, lined with headstones taken from the city's Jewish cemetery. That cemetery, once among Europe's largest, with well over 200,000 graves, was destroyed by wartime occupiers in 1942, and its stones reused across the city. People with leprosy sit by a gate of Jerusalem under Ottoman rule, 1895. Before effective drug therapy in the mid-20th century, many were kept outside city walls and lived on alms. A hotel room in Yosemite was built around a live cedar, the Big Tree Room, shown here in 1910. The tree stood about 175 feet tall and 8 feet around, added by hotel keeper James Hutchings, but the room and tree are now gone. Korea, 1950. An ambulance driver weeps after a mine destroyed his Jeep, and a close friend did not survive. A rare frontline image of medics carrying the same fear and loss as the soldiers they aid. Ford 3-ton M1918 two-man tank, built in Detroit in 1918, was meant as a cheap light answer to the French Renault FT, with a machine gun and twin Ford engines. It arrived too late for the war, so only a small test batch was produced. President Gerald Ford shares a casual backyard spaghetti dinner with a New York Times correspondent on October 18, 1975. The low-key meal shows his hands on press outreach as he geared up for the 1976 race. A German leader greets his official photographer while his personal doctor waits. Berlin, April 1939. This quiet birthday scene shows the inner circle just months before the war in Europe began. Elvis Presley was drafted in 1957 and entered active duty in 1958, training at Fort Hood before serving in Germany with the 3rd Armored Division. He earned sergeant by 1960 and refused special treatment, serving as a regular soldier. Paratroopers ride to the drop zone in 1967, helmets on and notes in hand before their first jump of the war. It was Operation Junction City, the only large United States parachute assault of the Vietnam War. Tomba was a Swiss hotel cat who greeted hikers, checked their packs, and then climbed whole routes with them before trotting back to the lodge. He even reached Rinderhorn, sure-footed on ice and refusing help, and locals said he was a mountain guide come back in cat form. Pamela Anderson at home in British Columbia in 1985, years before fame. Born in 1967 in Ladysmith, she was still a local girl. 4 years later, she was spotted on the stadium screen at a BC Lions game, which led to modeling, television, and eventually Baywatch. A U.S. Marine on Okinawa in 1945 shares canteen water with a small girl during the final Pacific Campaign. The island saw one of the largest amphibious operations of the war, leaving civilians trapped between lines, so moments like this stood out. Under towering stalactites, Fairy Moon married Francis James Hansford inside Fairy Cave, Victoria, on April 14, 1930. It is remembered as one of Australia's earliest cave weddings, staged deep underground in the Buchan Caves Reserve. Women from Guadeloupe, French West Indies, stand at Ellis Island in 1911 after arriving on the steamship Corona. Their madras head wraps and white dresses reflect Creole island style. In these peak years, officers processed thousands a day. Backstage in 1956, Julie Newmar readies for her Broadway break in Lil Abner, playing the scene-stealing Stupefying Jones on November 15. A rare Kodachrome glimpse shows the future star perfecting the look that would make audiences stop and stare. September 1958, Little Rock. 3 students study by television after the city closed all public high schools for a year to block court-ordered integration. The lost year sidelined about 3,700 teens and turned TV lessons into a stopgap classroom. Berlin, early 1960s. A father lifts his child to peek over the new concrete wall lined with barbed wire. Families on both sides were suddenly split, and this small moment became a quiet act of connection across a sealed border. A man stands at a rough shack during the Great Depression. By 1932, 1 in 4 workers had no job, and many lived in makeshift huts called Hoovervilles. Banks failed, savings vanished, and families wandered by foot and boxcar searching for work. A one-room schoolhouse in 1870 taught all ages together with one teacher, benches, and a wood stove for heat. Older pupils often served as monitors, and attendance shifted with planting and harvest seasons. Jane Mansfield at dinner with her mother, Vera Palmer, born Vera Jeffrey, late 1950s. Around this time, Mansfield had broken out with The Girl Can't Help It and won a 1957 Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. Moscow, February 1992. U.S. relief shipments arrived during the post-Soviet shortage, part of Operation Provide Hope, that flew tons of food and medicine in on C-5 and C-141 aircraft. Boxes marked USA stack up outside a metro stop. Yesterday's geopolitical rivals turned emergency suppliers. Kuwait, 1991. A shepherd guides his flock along the road while oil wells blaze on the horizon, ignited during the Gulf War. Even as months of sooty smoke turned day to dusk, pastoral life pressed on beside one of the largest human-made oil fires in history. In 1945, Princess Elizabeth served in Britain's Auxiliary Territorial Service as a driver and mechanic. She trained on military trucks and ambulances, earned the rank of junior commander, and remains the only British royal heir to serve in uniform. In November 1989, Berliners flooded the checkpoints as the border opened, and crews with hammers and cranes began taking down the wall after 28 years of division. Within a year, Germany reunified, and fragments of the wall traveled the world as tokens of a peaceful revolution. Captain Edward John Smith stands on Titanic's bridge in 1912, days before the liner began its only voyage. A veteran with over 40 years at sea, he led the ship that struck an iceberg on April 14 and sank in the North Atlantic, turning this calm portrait into a time capsule. Philippe Petit, the French high-wire artist, stands on the roof of the Twin Towers after his secret walk in 1974. He crossed a 61-meter cable about 417 meters above the streets for 45 minutes, making 8 passes before being arrested and later hailed as a city legend. A hand-built ferry of logs and canoes carries a 1930s American coupe across a river in Cameroon, 1940s. Before bridges reached many routes, crews poled vehicles over water like this, an ingenious link in Central Africa's growing road network. Leighton Junior School in Blackpool runs a safety-first class with a model street, teaching kids crossing rules and traffic flow using toy vehicles. After Britain introduced the Highway Code in 1931, many schools used tabletop demos like this to build road sense in young pedestrians. Lancashire coal miners run an ARP drill on 15th of September 1939, wearing protective suits and gas masks while carrying stirrup pumps and water buckets. Weeks after Britain entered the war, industrial crews trained to fight fires and keep vital pits operating. Rehabilitation Center for Blinded Soldiers, Paris, 1916. Nurses lead men in a training line to relearn orientation and daily skills like Braille and simple crafts as eye injuries from trench warfare surged. These programs became early models for modern mobility training and veterans care. Late 1800s ring with a hidden compartment and flip lid opened by a small inner lever. Such poison rings were used to carry tiny doses of powders or keepsakes, blending jewelry with stealthy storage. Nanny Doss, an American homemaker, was linked to multiple family and spousal deaths from the 1920s to the 1950s. She gained the nickname Giggling Granny for smiling and laughing during questioning and in court, a chilling contrast to the accusations. Jim Morrison's resting place at Père Lachaise in Paris became a constant pilgrimage site, covered with flowers and notes. The bronze bust, added in 1981, was stolen in 1988. Today, a new stone carries a Greek line, meaning true to his own spirit. London, 1924. A muffin seller balances a tray of muffins and crumpets on his head and rings a handbell to advertise door-to-door breakfast. These vendors often rented bells from local guilds and could be fined for ringing outside permitted hours under city noise rules. East Berlin police study a West Side photographer through binoculars, 1961. That same year, the Berlin Wall sealed the border, making a camera lens one of the few ways to look across. Rare 1970s photo. Kim Jong-il greets performer Ko Young-hui backstage. Born in Osaka in 1952, she moved to North Korea as a child and became a star dancer on state tours. She later became his partner and the mother of Kim Jong-un, with her role kept private for years. Elba Day, April 1945. American and Soviet soldiers link up near Torgau, Germany, with banners in Russian reading, "American greeting to brave Russian allies," and "Americans will never forget the feat of the Russians." This cast-iron radiator has a built-in warming box that used spare heat to keep bread and plates warm. Around 1900, homes used designs like this to save fuel and space, a clever energy idea from daily life. J. Robert Oppenheimer gives a lecture at Kyoto University on September 14, 1960, in front of a chalkboard full of equations. In these years, he stressed quantum theory and spoke about science and responsibility, shaping public thought. A man lifts a child from a flooded window during the London flood of 1928. The event swamped riverside streets and pushed the city to strengthen embankments and early warning systems. Marilyn Monroe promotes a charity drive to fight arthritis in 1955, marking March 30 on a giant calendar. Her appearance boosted donations and attention for patient care and research. Teenagers' push start a Ford Model T, a tough car built from 1908 to 1927 that kids loved for its roomy cabin. During World War II, no new cars were sold, so people kept old Fords running and even packed in a dozen friends for games. Sailors stand on a tilted deck of the Imperator Alexander as strong wind pulls the square sails tight. Around 1906, tall ships like this still carried goods across oceans even while steamships were taking over. Irish Macalla rests at home after an onset accident during the second season of Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, around 1956. She often did her own stunts, hurt her knee and arm, and later returned to work, which boosted the show's legend. Enelut, also called Unangax, extended family stands outside their home on St. George Island in the Bering Sea, 1917. This remote Pribilof Island was a seal harvest center, and within a year, the global influenza would reach Alaska and reshape community life. F-6, Hellcat pilots from Navy Squadron VF-16 celebrate on their carrier after intercepting an incoming formation near Tarawa in November 1943. They brought down 17 of 20 planes, a clear sign of how the Hellcat changed air power in the Pacific. A United States soldier and his girlfriend share a drink in Florida on May 27, 1944. Shot on Kodachrome, the rich color preserves a warm home front moment just days before the Normandy landings. Indian researchers offer coconuts to the people of North Sentinel Island in 1991 during a short, supervised visit. India later ended such visits to protect the islanders and their way of life. Georgia Fudge, a pioneer in women's bodybuilding, flexes in 1981. She placed in the top 10 at the first Ms. Olympia in 1980 and later promoted women in sports and fitness. Chicago, June 5, 1943. Evelyn Jackie Bross and Catherine Barsh were held at a station for a city clothing rule that targeted women who wore men's clothes. Their case made headlines and later became a touchstone in talks about ending such laws. United States Marines crouch in heavy rain on Guam in 1944, working a field radio and guarding with M1 rifles. The island was retaken in late July and August, giving airfields for long-range flights across the Pacific. A Paiute woman grinds acorns in a wooden mortar outside a tool hut in Lemoore, Kings County, around 1900. Acorn flour was a main food across California. The meal was washed to remove bitter tannins and stored for winter. A German family stands in the ruins of their home after the Upper Silesia unrest in 1920 to 1921. Soon, a League of Nations vote split the region between Germany and the New Poland, changing daily life on both sides. In 1931, a New York tenement family does piecework sewing at home to cover rent. During the Great Depression, many families earned only a few cents per garment, and even children stitched late into the night. Dauntless dive bombers lined the Douglas Aircraft Factory in El Segundo, California, in 1943, captured in rich original color. This tough plane helped turn the tide at Midway in 1942, putting 4 carriers out of action. In May 1864, injured Union soldiers rest under Brompton Oak on Mary's Heights during the Overland Campaign. Matthew Brady made this photograph. Open-air care sites were common then, and medical help and sanitation were very limited. The Yukon River bends past Klondike in front and Dawson at upper right in 1899, near the height of the gold rush. Dawson swelled to about 30,000 people as river steamers carried miners and supplies deep into the far north. Marines of the 4th Division step onto the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. The island's airfields were vital for B-29 flights, and the push toward Mount Suribachi became one of the most documented moments in the Pacific. On August 20, 1945, Lieutenant Tetsuo Tanefuji posed with his wife before a one-way mission in Manchuria. Another pilot brought his fiancée, and the planes never returned, leaving the final moments unknown. A Czech protester holds the flag before a line of police during the Velvet Revolution in November 1989. Crowds rang house keys to say time to go, and within weeks one-party rule ended, and Václav Havel became president. A United States P-2V Neptune patrol plane flies low over a Soviet cargo ship during the Caribbean Missile Crisis in 1962. Crews photographed deck cargo to verify the removal of launch parts under the blockade agreement. Winston Churchill stands with German Emperor Wilhelm II during autumn maneuvers near Breslau in 1906. Within 8 years, their countries would be on opposite sides in the First World War. A young resistance member in Yugoslavia stands with a rifle during 1943. The partisan movement included many women who served as scouts, couriers, medics, and fighters across the hills until liberation. President Emil Hácha rides back to Prague in March 1939 after a night meeting in Berlin. He had just agreed to place Bohemia and Moravia under German control, ending Czechoslovak independence until 1945. James Meredith sits among graduates as he earns his degree on August 18, 1963, the first black student to finish at the University of Mississippi. He enrolled in 1962 under federal protection, turning a campus standoff into a milestone for equal education. Rudolf Hess stands outside the small summer house inside Spandau Prison in West Berlin. He was held here from 1947 to 1987, the last 20 years, as the only inmate, and he died on these grounds at age 94. Inside Great Dixter, a medieval timber hall in Sussex, nurses and volunteers care for injured soldiers in 1916. The manor became a Red Cross hospital, with beds in the Great Hall and meals served at long tables. 2 veterans who lost their sight in the First World War play music on a Berlin street in 1920. Many men with injuries turned to busking in the Weimar years because pensions were small and the city gave badges to licensed performers. Adolf Hitler inspects a ruined building in Berlin on April 20, 1945, with his aide Julius Schaub at his side. Historians note this as one of the final verified images of him before the fall of the city. Photographer Frank Hurley built this dramatic scene by combining several negatives, showing planes low over troops leaving a trench. In the First World War, he used composites to reveal scale and motion a single frame could not, a method that sparked debate among officials. A German soldier in 1917 readies a stick grenade beside a forward trench post. The long-handled steel hand granite was built for easy throw, while a model 0815 machine gun guarded the lane ahead. Women weave rope soles and straps for handmade sandals in a Hungarian village in 1949. After the war, families often made shoes from flax or hemp at home workshops to stretch scarce leather and earn extra income. Children steer a homemade raft down a shallow creek, captured on Kodachrome in the 1950s. Kodachrome, first sold in 1935, keeps bright color for many decades, so this small river adventure still looks fresh. French soldiers in the Vosges in 1916 throw stones from a hillside trench to push back an attack. In trench war, men used rocks when ammo was low or to keep heads down, a rough tactic seen on many fronts. Kumara storage pits cut into a hillside at Ruatahuna in Te Urewera, North Island, photographed by Albert Percy Godber in 1930. The earth walls held steady, cool, and dry air, letting sweet potatoes keep through winter for the Tuho community. A night raid lights the sky over an American bomber base in the Soviet Union in 1944. Searchlights and tracer lines cross the scene as a white pillar of blast rises beside grounded planes. It was tied to the shuttle missions called Operation Frantic. An M4 Sherman tank rolls off a tank landing ship onto a sandy beach. These ships had wide bow doors and a ramp to unload cars and trucks directly onto land, which sped up landings across many coasts. Women oil the switch points on the Great Western Railway at Reading, Berkshire, on April 20, 1943. During the Second World War, thousands of women kept Britain's railways running, caring for engines and tracks so supply trains stayed on time. Two young women handle a box camera and a folding camera in the late 1930s, when cheap roll film put snapshots into daily life. This new hobby built huge archives of family moments just before World War II reshaped lives. Two German soldiers support an injured British serviceman amid the ruins. In the Great War, foes sometimes shared water or first aid under Red Cross rules, brief acts of care on a hard front. Jackson's Bar in Idaho in the 1890s shows a simple plank saloon in a mining town. Frontier bars doubled as a post stop and news hub with sawdust floors, quick meals, and poker for prospectors. A ground crewman lifts a B-17 Flying Fortress with a rubber airbag to reach the landing gear, 1943. The 8th Air Force used these portable bags to raise damaged planes when jacks could not fit under bent wings. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, was the most famous pilot of the First World War. He flew a bright red Fokker and was credited with 80 air victories, a symbol of early flight skill. 4 brothers in striped jail outfits for Halloween in 1967. Their grandma sewed every piece and they won a local contest. In the 1960s, many costumes were homemade from fabric and cardboard before store-bought sets filled shelves. Fort du Haumont, the key Verdun fortress, looks whole before 1916, and then like a cratered outline after months of fire with only the concrete shell left. Taken by German troops in February 1916 and recaptured by France in October, its fate shaped the Verdun campaign. A German observation balloon is brought down over the Western Front. These balloons spotted targets and guided artillery, so they were watched by aircraft escorts and anti-aircraft guns at all times. A British soldier uses a trench periscope to look over the wall, while his Lee Enfield with bayonet rests nearby. The steel Brodie helmet and leather jerkin suggest about 1917 to 1918 on the Western Front. Lucia Harris, a 6'3" star, was drafted by the New Orleans Jazz in 1977 after leading Delta State to 3 national titles and winning a silver medal at the first Women's Olympic basketball tournament in 1976. She declined the tryout because she was pregnant, making her the first and only woman officially drafted by the National Basketball Association. Families rest in a field during the Russian famine near the Volga region, 1921 to 1922. Drought and years of war ruined crops, and the American Relief Administration, led by Herbert Hoover, fed millions daily with soup kitchens across the region. Soldiers install a hollow steel tree to replace a real trunk, a hidden lookout first used in 1915. Inside a ladder and narrow viewing slits let scouts watch the line without being seen, an idea quickly copied by both sides. Shoe stores once used X-ray boxes so shoppers could watch their toes inside new shoes. Millions tried them until safety rules in the 1960s and 1970s removed the machines. Tokyo, September 27, 1945. Emperor Hirohito stands beside General Douglas MacArthur in a photo that stunned the public. MacArthur wore a plain shirt on purpose to signal a new order and the start of Allied occupation and reform. In 1965, Brian Robson tried to mail himself from Australia to Britain inside a wooden box to save money. The crate went the wrong way to the United States. Staff found him, and he later flew home the normal way. Crews added field fixes like sandbags, spare track, logs, and even wet cement to soften blasts and keep moving. Some ideas worked, some proved heavy with little gain. The sharp rhino prongs on the front were built in Normandy in 1944, from scrap to cut through hedgerows and surprise defenders. U.S. airmen watch a festival game at Neubiberg near Munich in 1957, when American bases joined local Oktoberfest fun. Despite its name, Oktoberfest starts in late September and began in 1810 as a royal wedding party. On a Brussels roof in 1955, chimney sweeps Antoine Béchils and his wife Marie share a kiss during work, photographed by Harry Kerr. In much of Europe, chimney sweeps are seen as good luck, and their ropes and brush balls kept chimneys clear and homes safe. A giant street poster in Leningrad in 1945 calls people to rebuild after the 872-day blockade. In the first post-war years, residents cleared ruins, reopened factories, and restored landmarks across the city. Children receive bottles of milk inside Moscow's Mayakovskaya metro station in January 1942, while the city hides from air raids. The deep Art Deco station also hosted a wartime speech, showing how subways became lifelines under the streets.